So the purpose of life really is what our innermost potential is, to realize that. The Vedanta Sutras tell Anandamayo Bhyashat, which means there's something that every being has in common is we're looking for pleasure. When a little ant is crawling around on your kitchen counter, that ant is looking for pleasure. And just when I was up in this room of this beautiful house, I went out into the balcony. There were so many incredible birds singing. And I saw blue birds and red birds and brown birds, and it was just beautiful. And they were singing and flying, and they're all looking for pleasure. And we want to avoid that which interferes with our pleasure, which is called pain. And that's really what everybody's doing. You know, we eat because we want nourishment for pleasure. We take medicine because we don't like to be in pain. We go to the, so much entertainment is there to give us some sense of pleasure. What is the origin of that desire for pleasure? Wherever there's life, there's a search for pleasure. And things could give some fleeting pleasure to the body and mind, but things could never give satisfaction to the heart. The only thing that gives fulfillment to the heart is love. To love and to be loved. If we don't have that, our life is really, really just groping in so many shallow, superficial experiences. It's like a little child. If you give a child nice clothes and nice toys and nice everything, but you don't have time to give the child love, she may look very pretty, but she lives in misery. Ultimately, we all need to be loved. And we all need to love. And the origin of that is the soul's nature to love. That is the only true nature of the soul, is to feel the infinite love of God and to be an instrument of that love in whatever we do. Whether we're mothers or fathers, or whether we're engineers or doctors or lawyers or real estate agents or farmers or swamis. The true potential that we're really seeking is to awaken the love that's within us and to express that love through whatever we do. And self-realization is awakening that love. That love is eternal. Truly, in the path of bhakti, which is the path of the yoga of love, when we realize that love that's within ourselves, that is our true nature, our deepest potential, then in that love we're fearless. We feel protected by that love. We call God Krishna. There's many names of God. But when we feel that love, it's like a little baby in the arms of her mother. She feels safe. She feels protected. It really doesn't matter what's going on around. About a year and a half ago, I was asked to give a lecture in Dubai. Can I tell you a little story? Is this too long of an answer?
No.
Well, there's a hotel, I think it's called Burj di Arabia or something. It's a 7-star hotel. And I was asked to speak in the royal ballroom to all these millionaires and billionaires. And I sat down at this table. It's really a luxurious place. They gave me a tour before. They showed me some rooms. And it's really like a museum. And, you know, the price of the room for one day is so much that I was thinking, you know, why would anyone want to go to sleep? It's like hundreds of dollars a minute that you're wasting when you're sleeping. But anyways, on my way there, they took me. Anyways, the interesting thing is I'm in this place, and I'm speaking to, you know, very, you know, wealthy people, and the subject they gave me was simple living and high thinking. And the ambassador to India introduced me, the Indian ambassador, and he said, Swamiji is going to speak on the subject of simple living and high thinking, and considering all of you in this place, I'm really wondering, what is he going to say? So I gave a talk, but in essence, I spoke that simple living and high thinking doesn't necessarily mean being rich or being poor. It means in whatever situation we're in, with whatever we have a genuinely simple, well-wishing heart. That's simple living, high thinking. Where we love. We feel God's love, and we want to share that love with a simple, well-wishing heart. Whether we're millionaires or billionaires, or I told them I haven't had a bank account since 1969. And I haven't signed a check. And then I was taken to another lecture, and to get to that lecture, we had to walk through what they told me was the largest shopping mall on the planet Earth. Have you been there? It's really a big shopping mall. And I'm not used to going to shopping malls. Believe it or not, I've never been to a shopping mall in New Jersey or anywhere. But I'm walking through, and it was like a Saturday night, and it was really crowded. And it's really an expensive shopping mall. We went to this one floor, and it was like 3 floors of an aquarium. And I looked, it's a huge aquarium. And I'm looking up, and there's glass all around, and there's sharks swimming right at me. And there's stingrays and all kinds of fish swimming, and all very high level shops. And it was crowded with people, and there's music playing, and there were really thousands and thousands and thousands of people from every part of the world. I don't know, there may have been somebody from Dubai there too. It's really an international place. And as I was walking, I saw something. I think they were Americans. There was a mother and a father, and they had a little girl. They were coming up an escalator. And she looked like about 4 years old. And the mother had one hand and the father had another hand. And she was just smiling, and she was jumping, and she was asking them to pull her up, and they were making her bounce up and down by going like this in her hands. And then she'd, let go, and she'd start dancing in front of them, and then she'd hold their hands. And she just looked so happy. There's thousands of people swarming all around, and she was just smiling and laughing. Now, Swamis have a certain way of looking at reality from different perspectives. So I was watching, and I was really feeling kind of thrilled to see her happiness. But then I was thinking, what if she was right there where she is now, with thousands of people all over the place, and the sharks, kind of swimming toward her, and her mother and father were not there? Can you imagine a little 4-year-old girl in that situation without the security of her mother and father? She would have been completely disoriented, in total fear. Everything she was enjoying would have been like gruesome to her. All the people, all the music, all this, everything. Because she would have no shelter. And I was just imagining if she was lost, what her state of being would be. What was the shelter she was feeling? If her mother and father were not there, why she couldn't get that shelter from all the tens and thousands of other people around? Or thousands. The shelter was, she trusted their love. Mm-hmm. That's the difference between her mother and father and everyone else there. Even the sharks. She trusted her parents loved her. And her parents did love her. So she was fearless. In the love of her parents. In that sense. And we're all like that child. If we don't feel the shelter of love, we're in a very, very insecure state of consciousness, whatever our age may be. And little children may cry or just become completely numb and silent as a reaction. And adults, they act in different ways to try to compensate that emptiness. But when we feel God's love, Bhajahure manasri nandanandana abhaya charanara, we feel shelter in that love. And that love is within us. It's our nature. Unfortunately, we spend our whole lives trying to find it through various circumstances, things, and situations outside of ourselves. Love is not something we find outside of ourselves. Love is something we discover within ourselves, and then we share it. We share it outside of ourselves. And from a spiritual sense, enlightened people, loving people, help us to find that shelter within our own selves. I can tell you one little story, and then I'm going to go on to the next question. About a very special person I knew. This book, The Journey Home, I never wanted to write it. But my dearest friend, his name was Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He was African American. He was a graduate of Princeton. He was born in the ghettos of Cleveland, but somehow he had such a positive attitude of life in the 50s and 60s. He got a scholarship. He was a civil rights leader. But he really wanted to make a positive difference in the world. And he understood that that needed to be spiritual. So we have the same guru, and we've known each other since the early 70s. And he was dying of cancer. And his doctors told him at one point that he had 3 days maximum to live. And he called me. Actually, one of his students called me and said he really wants to see you before he dies. He's supposed to die in 3 days. And he was in Pennsylvania. So I drove about 5 or 6 hours to go and see him. And it was really beautiful. It was sad but happy. When I arrived, I was at a conference with hundreds and hundreds of people, and I was supposed to speak the next day in the afternoon. But I told the organizer I have to leave in the morning. So he said, well, speak in the morning, and then go after that. So I spoke in the morning, and I told everyone I'm going to see Bhakti Tirtha Swami because he's supposed to, leave us in a few days. And then I gave a little talk, and then I got in the car and I drove out, and I happened to look in the rearview mirror, and there was like 30 cars following me. Practically the whole conference came to be with him. And his room was filled with people. And there were all kinds of people. There were people who were enlightened sages, and there were people who were abused, and people who were cynical, and people who were gone through so many different experiences of life. And as he was talking, he's just sitting there in a little chair. One of his legs is amputated. He has gigantic tumors all over his body. He's emaciated, thin. And he's just smiling and he's talking. And everyone in the room was crying. Their hearts were so moved by him. And afterward, I was walking out with everybody else, and people were literally gasping, saying, I've never had an experience like this in my life. People were falling down in happiness. They were just so moved. So I went back in the room, and it was just the two of us. And I said to him, how did you do that? I've known you for 30 years. I never saw you do that to people. And he smiled. He said, you see, I'm in this world to serve. And I can affect people in a positive way more in a couple hours than I would be able to do in 30 years if I were to live. So he said, therefore, this disease is a blessing. Because I have a platform where I can affect people in such a positive way. And he really meant it. He said, I'd rather affect people positively like this and live a few days than live so many long years and not be able to do this. He said, to live means to serve. To love means to serve. So the next day I had to leave because I had lectures at colleges and lectures at corporations, and I had meetings and so many things. I had a really busy schedule. So the next day I go to him and I'm just about to say goodbye. And I know it's going to be the last goodbye because he only has 2 more days to live. But before I could say goodbye, he was laying in his bed and I was sitting in a chair next to him. He said, I want to die in your arms. Please stay with me. And I said, my brother, I'm with you till the end. Little did I know that he'd last 8 more weeks. So everything was canceled in my schedule. Because we have to make our priorities in life. I never could experience how 2 human beings could love each other so deeply. I've read about it, I've pondered on it, but it was unbelievable. Because every day we were expecting he could leave us on that day. So the dialogue that we had with each other, both emotionally as well as verbally, was so much to help us to connect to that divine essence within ourselves, to help us to connect with God. We shared God as Krishna. And because we were just in such an unselfish way trying to help each other to enter into that beautiful state of God's love, our love for each other grew. Like I can't even explain it. We were just totally there for each other. I remember one day, and he was going through so many ups and downs. One day, he was passing large amounts of blood in his urine. And I went in to see him. And as we're talking for a couple hours, he looked up at me and he had tears in his eyes. He was smiling. He had such a blissful smile. He said, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're here with me. He said, dying is a very difficult thing. He said, no one can understand what it's like. He said, I've helped so many people dying in my life, because he was a high priest. He was a Swami. He said, but you can't really know what it's like unless you go through it. And he said, I cannot express to you what it means to me that you're with me. He said, I feel that you're going through the whole process with me, side by side. And I said something, I thought I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't. I said, Maharaj, that's what I called him. I said, I am going through this with you. I'm with you. And we talked for about another hour. And then I went back to the room I was staying in. And I went to pass urine. And it was bright red. And I didn't eat beets that day. And when it has never been like that in my entire life. And I thought, God, I really am going through this with him. You know, he's passing urine and I'm blood, and I am too. And it wasn't about, you know, a physical condition. It was about we were just that connected, that physiologically we were sharing the same experiences. And there are so many beautiful things to say about those last 8 weeks. In fact, after he did pass, I gave a talk, and I think it was about 6 hours just talking about some of the things that we shared together. But while I was with him, I got a call from Mumbai, because that's where I live. And there was a student of mine. His name is Stoka Krishna. And I was told he was only at that time about 30 years old. And I've known him since he's a teenager. And he used to be like a personal assistant to me. I used to travel and he would come around India, and he was a monk. And then later on, you know, he decided to get married, and he got married, and his wife became pregnant. And I got this call that he was just diagnosed with the most ferocious cancer there is. Once it's diagnosed, you don't live for more than a couple weeks. And there's no cure. And I really wanted to be with him. But I was with Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and I promised I wouldn't leave him. So I couldn't leave. So I talked with Stoka Krishna on the telephone. He was in Mumbai, and he was just so positive. He said, no, don't worry about me. I'm in God's hands. I'm in Krishna's hands. And I was, you know, just expressing my gratitude and trying to, you know, encourage him to find that place within himself that's beyond birth and death. And after when Bhakti Tirtha Swami did pass from this world, a few days before, he made me promise that I would write a book about my travels when I was young. And I told him I would not write it. I said it would be an act of arrogance for me to write a book about myself. And he said, if your story will help other people, then it's an act of arrogance not to write it. He held my hand and he said, promise me on my deathbed that you will write this book and you will publish this book. What am I supposed to say? I really didn't want to write this book. So I said, I promise. And then he looked at me real sternly. He said, you cannot lie to a man on his deathbed. So I decided, as soon as I walked out of his room, I'm going to think of really good excuses to get him to allow me to withdraw my promise. But then he left. So I had to write the book. But then when I went to India, this is like 2 months later, Stoka Krishna's still alive. When Bhakti Tirtha Swami left, he had hundreds of people who came because he was going through those last stages. And his caretakers, who were just beautiful people, they kind of announced that he's going to leave within the next 12 hours. And there were hundreds of people in his house. Everyone was singing beautiful kirtan, like we are singing now. Everyone was singing, and it was from their hearts. They were chanting with prayer to just help him to be with God, and for God to be with him. And it was actually beautiful. The chanting went on for hour after hour after hour. And I was sitting right at his bedside, holding his hand when he departed. And it was really special. Mm-hmm. Everyone was crying. Hundreds of people. They were crying with joy. They were crying with both sorrow and joy simultaneously. Mm-hmm. The sorrow was that the medium of his body, which we could relate to him, is no longer here. But the joy was they knew his soul was exactly where he wanted to be. Just a few days before that happened, he turned to me and he said, his body was really in a lot of pain that day. It was trembling. And we were chanting together, just the two of us. And he said, I would not trade my position for anyone else in the world, because I've never felt so close to God. Mm-hmm. He said, when I'm chanting Krishna's name, I am experiencing Krishna's love so deeply. I would not trade my place for anyone else. And then he looked at me and he smiled and he spoke from his heart with total conviction, with the innocence of a child. He said, I know where I'm going and I'm really happy to go. And he meant it. And he left. And soon after I went back to India. 2 months later, Stoka Krishna's still around. We have a hospital that we oversee. It's called Bhaktivedanta Hospital, and it's dedicated in the memory of my guru, Srila Prabhupada, whose name is Bhaktivedanta also. And it's a different kind of hospital in that we have all the main branches of allopathy. They do open heart bypass surgeries, and they have, what they call where they those machines for your dialysis. And they have, the gynecology ward. My God, sometimes there's little babies this big in incubators. They do cancer surgeries, and they have an emergency ward. They call it casualty in India. So it's a 200-bed hospital, and they do a lot of relief during emergencies and a lot of charity things. But they have a whole branch for Ayurveda, a whole branch for homeopathy, a branch for acupuncture, a branch for naturopathy. And all of these different forms of medicine, the doctors all work together to help each patient. Because, medicine is a lot like a religion. That, we are the way, the truth, and the life, and light, and there's no other way to health except through us. But, these doctors all recognize and appreciate the value of every other branch of medicine, and they work together, and it's incredible. But the basis of the hospital is spiritual care, where we have people who are trained in this, who go bed to bed and help the patients as well as their relatives, to deal with these situations in such a way, whether they're Muslims or Christians or Jains or Sikhs or Parsis or Hindus or whatever, Jews, they get spiritual care, universal spiritual care, and that's what people really appreciate more than everything else. Because in many ways, that's what people need the most. So Stoka Krishna was in the hospital, and people were coming to help him, to encourage him. But everyone felt encouraged by him. He was always smiling. And when I arrived in Mumbai, before I saw him, some of the monks who used to be monks with him, because he was a monk, some years before, they said, it's very difficult to take him seriously because he's dying, he's emaciated, he's paralyzed practically from his waist down. And yet he's always smiling. It has to be something artificial. But as time went on, all these monks, he's a family man with a little baby and everything. While he was on his deathbed, I was there. His wife gave birth to a little daughter. And she brings the little daughter in, and he's smiling. He's looking at the daughter, and the daughter is like... And I'll never forget when I first went to see him, what he said to me. Here he is, 31 years old. He's paralyzed, terrible pain. He's going to die any day. He has a wife who loves him, and he has a little baby. Most people would ask, why is God doing this to me? He did ask that question. But the way he asked it, I want to share with you, because it changed my life. He said, why is God doing this to me? He said, I don't deserve this. He said, I don't deserve. I've had the last 15 years living with such beautiful, saintly people. I didn't deserve that. I've been to thousands of kirtans of chanting God's names. Such a blessing. I didn't deserve that. Every day I've got to hear so many talks from the scriptures and so many enlightening sermons, and I've got to read so many beautiful books about Krishna and about enlightened sages and beings. He said, I didn't deserve that. God has blessed my life in so many ways that I didn't deserve. Why did God do that to me? He said, the blessings I have in my life, even though I'm only 31 years old, I could not ask for so many blessings if I lived for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. He said, the beauty of life is not in the quantity of years. The beauty of life is in the quality of the experiences we have. And God has gifted me and blessed me in every way. Why did God do this to me? I didn't deserve it. And he was smiling, and he was crying, literally in ecstasy. And I started crying, because he meant it. He was experiencing his eternal soul. He knew there is no death for him. And people who were having problems with their day-to-day lives, who were in very excellent physical health, were coming to him to get encouraged. And he was encouraging them. He was giving them hope. He was giving them, they'd look at him and he'd just be smiling. He was always smiling. Radiant smile. I'll try to get some photos of him. They would think, what are our problems compared to his? Our problems are nothing, insignificant. Why are we so distracted and taking them so serious and so disturbed by them? He lived another 6 months. And he was at the hospital. And then at a certain point, he wanted to come to our temple, because he said, I would like to go to the temple and be there for some time. So he came to our temple, and we had a little room. And I remember I was with him. There was a beautiful doctor named Madhvacharya who lives in Washington, D.C., and he happened to be visiting. And he's an anesthesiologist, is that what it's called? And he was so moved by Stoka Krishna. If you go to his home in Maryland now, right as you come into the house, he has a beautiful photo of Stoka Krishna smiling in his living room. He was there, and it was obvious he was going to leave really soon. So I was with him the night before, and I was holding hands with him, and he said to me, I'm ready to go anytime. He said, I know that Krishna's waiting for me, and I'm waiting for Krishna, so I'm ready to go. And I said to him, Stoka Krishna, please know that we promise we're going to, our temple and our congregation is going to take care of your daughter and your wife for the rest of their lives. You can be assured of that. And he smiled, he said, I know that. He said, I know you'll take care. He said, as long as I know they're going to be taken care of, he said, and I have complete faith that they will be. He said, I have no more attachments whatsoever to this world. I'm just waiting to be with Krishna, with God. And he smiled. And the next day, there were, dozens of people chanting for him. And I was with him, and I got real tired. So I went to my little room to lay down, and I was only there for a few minutes when there was a knock on my door. And I go to the door, and somebody had just come from Vrindavan, a very holy place. And they were giving me these gifts of all this holy water and holy leaves that they just came from pilgrimage. So I thought, oh, this is perfect timing. So I went and I put them all on Stoka Krishna, you know, the leaves, and I sprinkled them with water. He was smiling like this. And he was so happy. He said, Vrinda, he said, the holy places are all coming to me. And then I went to lay down again and knock on the door. I open the door, and it's this person named Madan Mohan Brijbasi, who's born and raised in Vrindavan, our holy place. And he's the sweetest, he's like in his 70s, but he's the sweetest, most innocent lover of God you could ever imagine. And he actually happened to sing for Bhakti Tirtha Swami in Pennsylvania. It's a long story, but he was singing and somebody else was speaking, and they wanted to meet me. So they called me, and they didn't know where I was, because you know how cell phones are. And they said, we really want to meet you. I said, well, I can't leave because I'm with my friend, because they usually always are in California or New Jersey, and we're somewhere near Harrisburg. So we talked for a while, and we realized we can't meet each other because I have to be with Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And then just as we're about to hang up, I happened to ask him, where are you? And they said, we're in this place. We don't know where we are. We've never been here before. We were just brought here to somebody's house to sing. And I said, can you ask him where it is? And he comes back, it's a place called Harrisburg. I said, I'm only a half hour away. So I went and picked him up and brought him to Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And when he was singing, this friend of mine, he was weeping in ecstasy. It was just induced that. So now, 6 months later, Stoka Krishna's his last hour. And Madan Mohan Brijbasi just happens to be coming through Bombay, so I bring him in and he's singing. And about 100 other people came and they were singing with this Madan Mohan. And I was holding Stoka Krishna's hand and he was smiling, and then he kind of went into, and he left.
Left at that moment?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he left.
That's great.
It was beautiful. He was covered with these leaves and sprinkled with water, and there were people singing, and I was holding his hand, and he was just...
Radhanath Swamiji, before the other question,
I hope I answered your question.
No, you did, but I actually inspired a question, which is through the pain, did they not take pain medication so they could be conscious? Were they taking limited pain medication so they could be conscious of transitioning consciously in Krishna?
If they required it, they did, yes.
They took it.
They did take it, but not large. Were they aware of not taking too much so they could be somewhat conscious as they were transitioning?
We have 2 hospices too that are connected to our hospital. And these particular people, I'm not really sure, but usually they take the minimal, not to just erase all the pain, but to have enough of a relief of the pain so that they could really be in good consciousness and be able to focus their minds. Because sometimes if the pain is so severe, it's very, very difficult.